Secrets and Spies presents Espresso Martini with Chris Carr and Matt Fulton.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Espresso Martini. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Chris. Good to be back.
Good, and thankfully we're now recording, which is good, so because we weren't just a second ago.
Yes.
Yes, we've got another jam-packed episode of Espresso Martini, and we also have our new Patreon exclusive show, Extra Shot. Extra Shot just starts after we finish Espresso Martini, and Matt and I will look at other stories that have also caught our eye in the world of espionage, geopolitics, and intrigue. To get access to Extra Shot, just go to patreon.com/secrets and spies, or click on the link in your podcast app. And depending on which level you support, you'll get some free Secrets and Spies coasters or a coffee cup as a thank you. So today's a bit of a different episode because we're joined by a special guest, Dan Kaszeta, and he is an expert on chemical, biological, and radiological weapons. And you may remember we talked about Dan in the last episode as he had found out he'd been blacklisted and banned by the UK government for speaking at official events. So Dan will join us a bit later in this episode to discuss what he's experienced and what he's found out about his blacklisting. But before we kind of go there, we are going to have a look at just some of the stories that have caught our eye. Earlier this week, former FBI agent Robert Hanssen died in jail. And Robert Hanssen was very famous for spying for the Russians and arguably might have been one of the most damaging double agents in recent history. There's a really good article on the BBC website titled Robert Hanssen, the Fake Job That Caught the FBI Agent Who Spied for Moscow. So Matt, I'm going to just quickly go through the key points and then I'll come to you for your thoughts.
Sure.
So Robert Hanssen was a former FBI agent who has died in prison, and he is known as one of the most damaging spies in the history of the FBI. He spied for over 20 years and he leaked highly classified secrets to Moscow, resulting in significant betrayals that the agency claims cost lives. It took the efforts of 300 agents to finally apprehend him, and Hanssen's espionage activities began in the mid-1980s after he had already been working for the FBI for a decade, and he operated as a mole, selling top-secret documents to the USSR and later post-Soviet Russian intelligence agency, the SVR. He apparently leaked over 6,000 pages of secrets to the Kremlin intelligence services. Worst of all, some of that information he supplied to his Russian paymasters led to the unmasking of at least 9 double agents who were working secretly for the US. Several of them were executed. Among the classified information he handed over were documents related to American nuclear programs and Soviet attempts to gather intelligence on them. In exchange for his deception, Hanssen received substantial payments totaling $1.4 million in cash, diamonds, and funds in a secret bank account. Hanssen managed to operate undercover for a significant period of time, employing traditional espionage techniques such as dead drops. He relied on dead drops, leaving materials for his handlers to find, and he chose inconspicuous locations in a suburban Virginia neighborhood near Washington, D.C. to leave his stolen intelligence. Furthermore, his handlers in Moscow were unaware of his true identity as he used the alias Ramon Garcia. Hanssen continues his activities even after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the USSR, attempting to communicate with the Russians until the moment of his arrest. However, a series of intelligence breakthroughs eventually led to the FBI identifying him as the mole. The FBI devised a plan to place Hanssen under surveillance, transferring him to a different position within the Bureau and creating a fake job where operatives could monitor his activities. FBI Richard Garcia, no relation to the alias that Hanssen used, along with undercover operative Eric O'Neill, played pivotal roles in gathering evidence and eventually exposing Hanssen's espionage activities, which culminated in the arrest of Hanssen in 2001. Now, if you've not seen it, there's actually a pretty good film called Breach with Chris Cooper, who plays Robert Hanssen, and Ryan Philippe as Eric O'Neill. So it's definitely worth having a watch of that. So Matt, this is a pretty sort of, I suppose, historic moment, the death of Robert Hanssen. What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I was recently actually a couple days ago for research for active measures. I was looking around at the Florence ADX Supermax prison where Hanssen has been for the last 20 some odd years. You know, nothing to do with Hanssen specifically, just looking at the prison and the type of people who were there. And I saw his name there on the list and I was like, oh yeah, it's that guy. And then, a couple days later, he ends up dead. I don't know. I tweeted after this news broke that happy hour around DC would be extra special for some today. I think, Hanssen is right up there with Snowden as like public enemy number one amongst people in the U.S. Intelligence community. I mean, yeah, the kind of damage he did is really staggering, like off and on from like 1976 up until, the day he was caught in early 2001, handed over a lot of damaging stuff to the first the KGB and then the Russian SVR. Stuff about like U.S. continuity of government programs, documents related to MASINT, measures, signals, intelligence, that kind of stuff. He blew the cover for the tunnel that the FBI dug under the Soviet embassy in Washington. Yeah, really just kind of staggering damage to the community. It's sort of always been a bit unclear as to, like why he did it. I mean, it's reported that he was paid by the Russians up to like $1.4 million in diamonds and just $800,000 in cash, which it really is not a lot of money if you think about it.
No, I thought that too. I mean, I know if you take into account sort of inflation stuff, it's probably a bit more than it sounds, but at the same time, is for the risks, it's still not that much, is it?
Yeah, back then, yeah, but I mean, you think like the trade-off, and the punishment that he got, like a 15 life sentences in ADX Florence. It's a particularly, I mean, that's like the most maximum security prison in the United States. Like the worst of the worst go there. Like a lot of terrorists, like the guy who did the 93 World Trade Center bombing, Richard Reed, I think, is in there too. A lot of like, I think El Chapo is in there, the head of the Sinaloa cartel. You're in there, yeah. You're under isolation for 23 hours a day. You get 1 hour of exercise, which is basically like you're allowed to just like walk in circles in this inner courtyard that only has a view straight up to the sky. Like you have sort of no way to tell where you are in the facility or just what's going on like in the outside world. The way their days are kind of regimented, you don't even come into contact with other inmates, so for 23 hours a day you're in this very small Spartan cell, like just you with nothing. And I mean, yeah, since he was put away in like 2001 2002 for the last 20 some odd years, that's been his life day in and day out. And you think for a guy like, I mean, I'm not sympathizing with him at all. He absolutely deserved what he did. But if you just consider like for a guy getting up there in old age, I mean, he was 79 when he died. I mean, that's a tough life. So then you think, yeah, like you did this for what? I mean, I guess it was just ego,
I think it was ego. Yeah, so I've got a few notes on that, actually. I mean, I'm also interested in his motivation. And one thing I noticed in his personal collection that I think is owned by the Spy Museum, in there is a Walther PPK, which is the gun of choice of James Bond. And I do wonder if, like, Hanssen kind of got off on the idea that he was the smartest man in the room and he was playing both sides of the intelligence game. And whether or not he kind of saw himself as some sort of James Bond, because there were some notes by O'Neill, Eric O'Neill, who helped sort of catch Hanssen in the act, and apparently, he described him as being a narcissist with a huge ego, and he wanted to be a mentor, and he wanted to impart his knowledge on someone, and he also wanted to be James Bond, and he resented that he was what he thought of as a kind of glorified librarian. So I think Hanssen was unhappy in the sort of job he wanted. He wanted to be a man of action. So it's an interesting one, that.
Yeah, I think it's also too, I mean, he worked in counterintelligence against the Russians. So like you're in the room as the intelligence community is aware of this mole and trying to find out who it is, and like you're there in the room while they're having these conversations. I mean, yeah, that's a huge ego trip for someone like that, and also like a huge hypocrite. Like he was a devout Catholic, like the kind to go to like Latin mass every day, like that kind of Catholic. At the same time, like recording like secret like sex tapes with his wife and sharing that with people, and he had some kind of relationship with a stripper that he took.
Yeah.
on trips with him.
Kind of reminds me of the BTK killer a little bit. You know, these sort of serial
Right.
killers who wrap themselves up as really deeply religious figures, but it turns out in their spare time they behave in ways that I think God would be quite unhappy with.
Yeah, BTK was involved in his church. I think that's how they
Yeah.
caught him. He sent him a letter from Microsoft Word,
Mm.
and it was, they knew that like this Microsoft Word was like registered to that church. I think that's how
Yeah.
they caught him. Yeah, just like the arrogance of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. And one thing I have noticed over the years about sort of like big criminals, serial killers, etc., obviously is either religion or charity they wrap themselves up as, because if you are seen as, oh, he's the man who donates millions to whatever, it makes people, I don't know, just it's a nice cover because you kind of look virtuous, and you kind of, you just sort of, to many, you become the last person you think of as being that person. Whilst I'm coming to learn that the people you should trust the least, the ones who supposedly are supposed to trust the most. So I remember in just in a small anecdote, years and years and years ago, I used to work in a photography shop about 20 years ago, and we had an in-store thief who got nicknamed the Phantom Menace by myself. And it turned out to be the last person we suspected. The guy who did it was the biggest brown nose in the shop, and worked for the Scouts, did all sorts of supposedly good things, and it turned out he was the guy stealing. I think he stole about £20,000+ worth of equipment in the end.
Wow.
So sometimes it's the last person you suspect with these things. One thought as well, you mentioned about his life in prisons. I've always had a bit of a, I think we talked about prison and all this sort of stuff a while back. I've always had mixed feelings about this sort of solitary confinement punishment, because it feels almost a bit crueler than death, and maybe a bit unnecessarily cruel. I don't know. As you just described his life, it just sounds like the worst version of the COVID lockdown, really. We're just stuck in one room, probably without any Netflix, and only allowed out once a day. It sounds terrible.
Yeah, I think, there's been studies about, the psychological effects of being in that kind of isolated environment for extended period, like years and decades at a time. And I don't have strong opinions either way on if it's humane or not. I don't know enough about it. I think a lot of the reasons why, in like Florence ADX, you have like these like people like him, convicted terrorists and stuff. But a lot of the other people are just criminals who were like extremely dangerous in the regular prison system, like assaulting, like repeatedly assaulting guards and other inmates and stuff, and they just kind of work their way up from facility to facility, and then you get to like the end of the road where like we don't have anywhere else to put you where you won't be a danger to others. And that's why I think most people that are in Florence ADX are there for that reason. And then you have some people like El Chapo Guzman, the head of the Sinaloa cartel, who represents, I think, a serious risk that a less secure prison, it's feasible, could be like assaulted by the cartel. So you have maximum security for that. And then you have people like this guy, or a lot of the other convicted terrorists like Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the guy who did the Boston Marathon bombing a couple years ago, that it seems like they're just placed there for like revenge, like people that like the US government just particularly kind of dislikes. So we'll stick them in like the deepest, darkest hole that we have. And I don't know. I don't have any strong opinions either way on if that's right or not.
Well, it's certainly a better fate than some of his victims. This is the thing with espionage. It's never a victimless crime. He endangered the entire United States with selling those secrets. He also led to the death of many Russian agents who were, obviously working for the CIA or MI6 or whoever in Western intelligence. And those people likely got a bullet to the back of the head. And it's usually in a very nasty cell. Is it? I forget where it is now. There's a particular place where they do it.
Lefortovo prison in Moscow.
And I think there are like remnants of bullet holes and brain fragments on the wall, aren't there? It's the last thing you look at. So
one of the, I want to say it was Penkovsky. Penkovsky was blown in the 60s, I think. This wasn't a Hanssen thing, but he was a GRU officer who kind of like broke the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's it. Yeah.
He was, I believe, he was like fed feet first into like an incinerator.
Yeah, I've heard that, and it's an interest that's open to debate. But I had a chat, funnily enough, with Michael Frost Beckner about that off air last year, because he did an episode. It was a CIA show called The Agency that Michael Frost Beckner was the showrunner on, and he's the writer of Spy Game. And in that, I think it's one of the early episodes, there's a FSB officer who has a similar fate where they're put into an incinerator, alive. And I don't know, I've heard that I've heard it confirmed, I've heard it denied. So I don't know for sure, but what a way to go if it is true. It's awful.
Yeah.
Burnt alive. Jeez. Well, look, is there anything else you'd like to say about Hanssen, or shall we move on?
Bye. Good riddance. Bye.
Yeah, goodbye to a very complicated and dangerous man.
Yeah.
So there we go. So moving on, we're now going into a pre-recorded interview that Matt and I recorded with Dan Kaszeta last week, and we're going to talk about how he was disinvited from speaking at a chemical weapons demilitarization conference, which was being run by the British government. Dan has subsequently found out that he's been blacklisted from speaking at any event hosted by the UK government. So Dan now joins us to explain what he found out. So Dan, thank you very much for joining us today. Matt and I were discussing your blacklisting by the UK government on our last episode of Espresso Martini, and I'd like to just go through with you today what happened to you. So I guess before we start, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, for the benefit of listeners who are unfamiliar with you and your work?
Okay, my name's Dan Kaszeta. I have about more than 30 years experience now in protecting and counteracting and dealing with the threat posed by chemical, biological, and radiological weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a career that started in the U.S. Army in the early 1990s and took me through assignments in the Pentagon, the White House Military Office, the U.S. Secret Service, where I protected George Bush Jr. from such weapons.
Yep.
It brought me to personal reasons brought me to the UK, but in 2008, my career continued, and I worked in private industry for a company that makes detection equipment to detect these kind of hazards. And for the last 12 years now, I've been a consultant, writer, more recently, a serious historian of the history of chemical and biological weapons. I've got several books out. It's not a very big pond that I'm in. I'm a big fish in a small pond.
Dan, thanks for coming on. It's good to have you. Can you talk us a bit about what the event you were invited to and what you're going to discuss there?
Yeah, I found myself embroiled in a scandal, basically. And a scandal wasn't me; it's the government's scandal, and I found out about it, basically. And let me give a preface to this. One of the many roles or hats that I wear, is I'm an associate fellow of the Royal United Services Institute,
Mm-hmm.
which is the oldest and longest standing, very prestigious defense and security think tank here in London. Now, I don't work for them. An associate fellow is more of a arm's length relationship. I have done consulting work for them. 2 years ago, my master's at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, I'll just call them RUSI for short here. That's what everybody here calls them. Said, Dan, we really want you to go to this chemical demilitarization conference. It's an annual thing. I say, yes, I know. It's the world's most boring conference. I know, but yes, okay, fine, I'll go. And it's an annual conference. For many, many years, it's been hosted here in the UK by the UK government. And some previous years, it's been elsewhere. But for the last number of years, it's either been in London or online because of COVID. So in 2021, I was asked to speak, and I gave a relatively short speech on, presentation, maybe a dozen slides on scenarios where I thought chemical demilitarization might be a possibility in the future. Now, for the benefit of the audience, chemical demilitarization is the sometimes tedious and highly technical process of getting rid of old chemical weapons. Whether they are things that are left over from a national program, like the United States is still grinding its way, both literally and metaphorically, through the very last sort of, remnants of its old stuff that it made during the Cold War. Or, for example, chemical weapons are discovered in a conflict zone or left over an old battlefield. So chemical demilitarization has been a thing for well, over
Yeah.
100 years now in places like Belgium and France, where things do get dug up. So it's an annual conference about that. Uh, at the risk of only the slightest possible hyperbole, it's a place where if you have 109 slides on the best possible synthetic drill bit to drill into an artillery shell without setting it off, this will be your forum. It's not a forum for controversy or anything like that. It's a very technical conference, at which I was the least technical end of a technical conference. So I went and I presented in 2021, no problem. Didn't think anything else of it. January of this year, the conference organizers, who were an arm of the MOD, the Ministry of Defense here, reached out to me and said, Dan, would you like to come back again? I said, okay, well, maybe why? And they said, well, yes, but you're going to have to pay the registration fee. I'm like, hold on. I don't pay to do work. People pay me to do work. All right. I'm not going to pay for the privilege of speaking at your conference. And they were like, well. But several days later, they came back to me. If you don't believe me, I'll show you the emails. I'll screen share them. They said, oh, we'll waive the fee if you agree to be a VIP speaker. Ah, that's more like it. Fine. The conference is literally a 9-minute walk from my house at a large hotel here in London. All right, fine. All right, deal. Fine. If I had to go to any great expense, I wouldn't have done it. But I said, fine. You're waiving the fee. I'll do it. So I marked off the days in my calendar. Okay, I'll go do this thing. Whatever. At least it'll be a networking event for me. I'll meet some people in person. I've only ever met online. Fine. Okay. In April, early April, I get an email. I get the stinkiest email I've ever seen in my entire life. I get this email that says, I'm sorry, we're going to have to uninvite you because government policy requires us to check your social media. And your social media says you've been critical of government policies or government officials, so therefore you can't come. And that's stunning. That's absolutely stunning. And so stunning, I just sort of sat on that email for several days, not knowing what to do. And I showed it to several academics who are friends of mine, who sort of in roughly the same circles. Hey, have you ever seen anything like this? This looks bad. Yeah, is this as bad as it looks? Everybody says, oh, Dad, it's even worse than you think. I mean, my God, that's really bad. I mean, this is horrible. This is, and, people start saying, people I trust and know started saying, hey, this is awful. This is an abridgment of freedom of speech. You should be free to criticize the government. And you weren't even going to talk about the UK government at all. One guy said, I saw your presentation from 2 years ago. You didn't even mention the UK. So it's a little bit like getting thrown off of a cooking show for supporting the wrong football team. It's a category error.
Well, can you talk to us a bit about, this email then? So what was the sort of wording of this email? What did they say?
Oh, well. Yeah, well, I'll read it I'll read it directly here. Dear Dan, we extended an invitation to you as guest speaker to the CWD conference, that's Chemical Weapons Demilitarization, and we're glad you accepted. Thank you for your interest in the conference and support. Rules introduced by the Cabinet Office in 2022 specify that the social media accounts of potential speakers must be vetted before final acceptance to the program. This is to check whether these people have ever criticized government officials or policy. The vetting process is impartial and purely evidence-based. Sorry, that laugh is my editorialization. The check on your social media has identified material that criticizes government officials and policy. It is for this reason, and not because we do not value your technical insight, that I'm afraid that we have no choice but cancel your invitation to the CWD conference. I hope that does not come as too much of a shock, and wish you well in your research studies relevant to chemical and biological arms control. It is good that you strive to achieve a world permanently free of such weapons. Best wishes. And it's a senior official and arm of the MOD. I'm not going to name this person because I still don't know whether this guy is really at fault or whether he said the quite a bit out loud and he was made to do this. He could be a hero for exposing this policy basically by sending this email, or he could have made a really bad decision, and I don't know which way that goes. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because I know who this person is.
Okay.
I've never met them. I know people that know him. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he was made to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is. And as the rest of the world has seen the wrath of Dan in the last couple of last 10 days here, If it turns out he's on the wrong side of this, he's going to get a full blast from me. But hey, he knows where to find me. Okay, if he's listening to this, talk to me. Yeah. So this whole thing's a bit, it's invidious. That's the word I'm looking for, and it's to quote the great columnist. There's a great columnist here for the benefit of the listeners who aren't in the UK. The Guardian newspaper has got this witty columnist named Marina Hyde. She, I think she used the phrase "Mandelbrot shittiness." With regard to something else. And that's what this is. It's every angle you look at. This is bad. First of all, blacklisting outside experts because of social media vetting is kind of wrong on the face of it. It also implies that civil servants are spending taxpayer time and money going through my epic social media output.
Dan, I guess on that point, I've been a fan of yours on Twitter for a while, and you're very outspoken about a lot of issues, I think good issues. What do you think it was that you said on social media that led you to being disinvited?
I don't know. There's a wide back catalog of stuff. If somebody wanted to find a grievance against me, it could easily be. A journalist for The Guardian gave some examples. I don't know whether he had inside knowledge or not on this. He reported that there was this Twitter thread that I retweeted that compared the then Culture Secretary Nadine Dorris to a series of car crashes.
We've all felt it.
We've all felt it. I wasn't the only person that retweeted that. And also, I referred to. I did also refer to an incident where they were threatening to deport an Afghan. This poor Afghan guy to Rwanda. And I said bloody Tories.
Yeah.
Now, honestly, I've said far more interesting and, frankly, inflammatory things than that. I should also say, so have many of my fellows who are actually literally fellows at the Royal United Services Institute, and have said things quite damaging to government policy and government decisions. We have a government that's at record low approval level. I'd say if you're going to cast a net and say if somebody's said something bad about a government policy or government official, that's most of us.
Yeah, it's a pretty desperate policy, I think.
Yeah. Well, not only that, it's totally disconnected with the subject matter at hand, and so it's an outright assault on my professionalism. It says I can't compartmentalize. Like I'm going to get up on a podium, stand behind a lectern, and say, "Hey, the immigration policy is bad." When I'm being brought in to talk about chemical demilitarization, I was going to talk about things like, you know what? We don't know what kind of chemical weapons North Korea has, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that I talk about professionally, there's not actually any difference between me and UK government policy. All right? Particularly in a very narrow forum like this particular one, where also only a small minority of the attendees were going to be UK government officials anyway. This is an international conference with people from all over. And so it's what it is. It's basically punishing me for what I've said elsewhere.
Yeah.
And is it really, well, we want experts like you to self-censor. And that's a chilling message to send.
That is a chilling message, and that's getting into very sort of icky territory. What have you found out, or what have you since found out about this blacklisting process? Because I know you've been sort of looking into it.
Well, yes, there is a ridiculous policy. Now, I started raising hell because, okay, first you have to question this. What sort of social media vetting of me does not yield the fact that I know a lot of people, and that a guy that worked in the White House for 12 years and who is, hangs out on Whitehall, for your non-UK listeners, Whitehall is the street where a lot of the government ministries are. I have levers I can pull. I can have hands I can shake. I can have doors I can knock on. I have ways to make a stink that the average person doesn't. And I've been making that stink, okay? And I have to give a lot of credit to my good friend, Edward Lucas. He is a columnist.
He's been a guest on this podcast as well.
Has he?
Yeah,
Has he?
He's been on a few times, yeah.
Oh, so you know Ed.
Oh, yeah.
You know Ed.
Ed's a good guy.
Well, see, the thing is, I've known Ed since 1991.
Oh, wow.
All right? And if you've known Ed since 1991, you know the whole world, okay?
I can't say I've known him that long, but...
Okay. All right. Imagine all the people that Ed has met and befriended in the last 30 years and the network he has, okay?
Yeah.
All right. He and I knew each other when we were nobodies. I'm still mostly a nobody. He's somebody, okay? And he said, "Dan, this is awful. Let's make a stink." And we made a stink. All right. You could read the blow by blow of the Times. I mean, I never had it on my bingo card that I was going to share the front page of the Times with Salman Rushdie.
Yes.
Yeah. So I started making a stink, and the stink rattled out a rather mealy-mouthed document out of the UK government, out of the Cabinet Office. And this mealy-mouthed document, it's a document called Due Diligence and Impartiality, Supporting and Protecting Our Diversity Networks. I'm not even sure that this document applies to my situation. I think that they've answered the mail with the wrong document here. Somebody has taken this document.
One like repurposed it or something.
Yeah, stretched it to cover things that it isn't meant to cover. If you read this document, basically nobody can speak to anybody or anything anymore ever, basically, if you follow it. And then an awful lot of people are going to be spending, and it's full of typos too, I should say. These are either typos or are really, they've signed their own, death warrant, really. Their decision matrix here. Is it possible to run this event without inviting the speaker? If yes, you may wish to consider changing the event to avoid any risk of impartiality. Oh, God forbid should we have impartiality.
Yeah.
Oh, it's best just not to have any speakers, I guess. Let's just have videos. I don't know.
Dan, have you found out about any other experts who've been blacklisted since? Like what are we not hearing from because of this?
Yeah, okay, because the obvious assertion here is that I'm the lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. I'm the unlucky person who got a little bit of a hint of what's going on because they actually said it in writing to me from a government email address. However, my plight has outed other people. Okay, I have to say there's a lovely academic named Kate Devlin. She's an expert on AI and robotics. She's come forward. She's been blacklisted. There are allegedly about 9 or 10 of us now. I'm not at liberty to name names. We have for lack of a better term, a neutral coordinator who's collecting the names is Professor Colin Talbot. He'd be another guy to talk to about this. He put himself forward as the sort of arbiter of this. So we're a little bit single-blinded on this. I know that there are 10 people. I know who some of the others are, but not more than that. But I suspect that an awful lot of people don't know because, gee, what if you just didn't get invited in the first place? How would you know?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they invited me and then uninvited me. Yeah, which is, they can't do anything right. I mean, a proper authoritarian regime running a blacklist wouldn't tell you you're on the blacklist.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah. His computer says no.
Well, yeah. It's just, you wouldn't know. What kind of Cirque du Soleil are they running here?
Yeah, or you would just disappear some night.
Yeah, or just, I just wouldn't ever get any phone calls or emails anymore. And
Right.
die of boredom,
Yeah.
Yeah. It would have been easy to leave me in relative obscurity. Instead, they gave me the world's biggest spotlight here. So on top of everything else, there's a whole angle. This is so incredibly, incredibly dumb.
Yeah. Well, Dan, one question that came to my mind as well was, could you being blacklisted from this event by the UK government, could that have a negative effect on your work and being able to speak at other similar events?
Well, yeah, it sort of casts a pall over whether I can go to other UK government-sponsored events.
Yeah.
Do I bother to even try? Do I waste my time preparing presentations until I get some sort of apology and shit saying, "Oh no," a letter saying this is all wrong, and and I doubt I ever will, to be honest.
No, governments don't really like to do that.
No.
Not under this government.
Exactly. And so there is that. I mean, it has given me a little bit of notoriety. Have people bought my book? Yes. But, honestly, if somebody buys a paperback copy of Toxic, I get about a pound and a quarter off of that. I don't make, I make beer money off of that. I don't make a living off of that. Whether somebody would view this as a black mark for other kinds of consulting work? Hard to say. I've done all kinds of stuff for the U.S. government as a subcontractor. While having slagged off Donald Trump rather badly, nothing ever happened to me. will I ride this one out? I certainly will, because I mean, I'm the I'm the really old guy in the field where people tend to leave young. Okay. I've got here I got here a long time ago, and I've stayed, and I will continue to stay in this field. I will wear these guys out, but I can't quantify the damage. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why it would make it hard for me to sue everybody. Oh, just sue them. How do I quantify the damages? And I can't. I can't even figure out exactly who to sue, because the
Right.
cabinet office is pointing at the MOD. The MOD is pointing at the cabinet office. They're all turning to one big blob. Uh, and I'm not giving it up until I can find out who's responsible and metaphorically skin them and stretch them out, turn them into a canoe. Metaphorically, I should say. That's not a threat. That's just a metaphor. And so I don't know where this leaves us. And what my next step is, I don't know. I'm continuing to dig into this policy. I think that this policy that was thrown at us doesn't apply to us. It applies to something called diversity networks. I looked up what diversity networks are. Things like Christians in government and the MOD Parents Network and stuff like that. I can't see how the diversity networks apply at all to the Chemical Weapons Demilitarization Conference. So my next step is to say, all right, what's the real policy then? This is clearly not it.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's other people now, sinking their claws in on this. Questions are being raised in Parliament. Members of several political parties have expressed support in this. It's not just me and one or two angry Lib Dems. We have a broader base of support.
Do you expect that this rule will be, I mean, let's say after the next election, Keir Starmer comes in and his people, do you think that this rule, I guess you suspect that this rule will, go away?
It'd have to, because if in a change of administration, this means nobody can talk to anybody.
Right.
Because allegedly it requires you to go back through 5 years of input. So that if the government changes, then the government can't get anybody that supported it, because everybody who supported it, the government was against it before. You see what I mean?
Right.
This is the kind of document that is written by somebody who thinks they're going to be in power forever, and that's chilling.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and also nobody voted for this. There's no signature on the bottom of this thing. It's all mealy mouthed and squirrely. Where did this diktat come from?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I'd read somewhere that apparently there might be a connection with Jacob Rees-Mogg for this policy, and also there was an event that happened, I think, a year or two ago, involving I think Black History Month, and there were a few speakers who were invited who were kind of a, should we say, left-wing persuasion, and they were kind of making certain sounds on Twitter beforehand about Boris Johnson being a privileged idiot and stuff like that.
Yeah, the rumor is that Jacob Rees-Mogg inflicted this while he was in the cabinet office. He is sort of distanced himself, somewhat now, but oh, don't look at me. But that's kind of how he rolls, These people they act like they're immunized against consequences.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and the whole thing's just it's a ball of shit every way you slice it.
Yeah.
We're back to that Mandelbrot diagram of a turd. Every way you look at it, it's just a big turd. And what's the way forward on this? Don't know. It's got under my skin now. I got journalists talking to me basically every day. I've got, more to do on this. Whether I'm going to turn into a broken record on this, probably not, because I have other things to do. I've got books to write. I've got, upcoming stuff. But I also want to encourage other people to say, hey, it's not just this crazy Dan guy. It's me too. And I think the more we can rattle out. And like I said, when I first got this, I was the only guy. All right. And now there's about 9 or 10 of us. And we seem to be adding to our number about 1 or 2 a week as, word gets through. And I've been encouraging people who think that they may have been excluded from something to send in subject access requests to the relevant departments under the data protection. And that's how Kate Devlin found out. She took one of the quotes that was in the subject access request reply, and she's put it on a T-shirt now. I give her a lot of credit for that. Bless her. I hope they say something pithy about me. I have subject access requests in at the MOD, and we'll see what they actually said about me. or whether they're just going to break the law and not accurately, answer those requests. In which case, this becomes a legal case for the Information Commissioner's Office. Also, what other stinkiness am I going to unearth on the way? I mean, one of the things in this policy, their checklist directs that you need to check in on the pseudonyms of social media. So is the government running around basically outing people who are writing anonymously?
Right.
Or what is the safeguard if they say, well, we think it's this guy? Well, that's not good enough to bar somebody from an event. This also means people who work for the government or are pro-government, they can hide by their pseudonyms, but people who are against the government can't. There's an equity thing there.
Well, you were never asked to like disclose all your social media accounts beforehand, right? This is something that they just did.
Well, exactly. And not only that, even though I have a very unique name, I've got imposters.
Right.
Particularly in the last couple of months. Who's to say they're looking at the right input?
Very true, especially with the way Twitter is now.
Yeah, I was going to say, with the whole verification process all shot to shit, like, who knows if that's actually you or not?
Yeah. Well, and God help me if my name was James Smith. I mean, God only knows there's a lot of bad stuff by James Smiths out there. If your name is James Smith, you might not ever speak to anything ever again just because they can't figure out which James Smith he is, so better be safe and... because I guarantee you there'll be a James Smith that's into cat porn and Holocaust denial and God knows what else.
They might want him to come in and speak at that one. I don't know.
Yeah. So, just the whole thing it's just half-assed. And so whoever wrote this document, and like I said, happy to, if you go to my pinned Twitter thread, there is actually a link to it. It's now in the House of Commons library, and they've had to put a link to the document. So I take partial credit for having outed this piece of shit document. So there you go. Where to go with this? Don't know. Watch this space. I will probably. I mean, like I said, I have found crappy things along the line here. I'm going to find more crappy things. Okay. I will turn up something else in there because you start turning over rocks, you find other things.
Yeah. Dan, for the benefit of listeners, where can they find out more about you and your work and your book, Toxic?
Oh, the best thing is my Twitter feed, which is Dan Kaszeta, Kaszeta. I'm the most easily found man on social media, clearly.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time on that. That's been great. Just before we get back to the last section of the show, I'd like to just take a moment to talk with you about Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN service that allows you to protect your privacy online. And I don't know about you, but I'm always on the move and I'm very reliant on public Wi-Fi. And sadly, public Wi-Fi is notoriously insecure and it puts your data at risk. And I've now started to use Surfshark to protect me when I'm on public Wi-Fi. I contacted Surfshark and we now have a special offer just for you where you get 83% off when you sign up and you also get 3 months for free. So to get access to this offer, please use our special code, which is the word secrets. Just use the word secrets at the register and you'll get access to that offer. I've put a link in the show notes below, so it's very easy. Just click on that link and follow it all from there. So anyway, hope that's helpful for you and let's get back to the show. Right, we're back. So we are now going to have a look at the Kakhovka Dam that was destroyed in southern Ukraine. So I'll just go to some of the key points and then Matt, I'll come to you for your thoughts. So the Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine was destroyed, causing a breach and endangering thousands of people downstream. Both Ukraine and Russia blame each other for the destruction of the dam, which has held back a massive body of water. At the time of this recording, there is still a dispute as to who is responsible. Local residents have described how they witnessed floodwaters carrying debris from washed out houses. Ukrainian emergency crews have been working round the clock to evacuate vulnerable individuals, whilst conservationists warn of an unfolding environmental disaster. The situation on the eastern bank of the river south of the dam was difficult to assess, but over 40,000 people in Ukraine and Russian-controlled territories could be affected by the flooding. President Zelensky accused Russian terrorists, whilst Kremlin spokesperson called the Ukrainian forces out for a sabotage attack. The dam's destruction could divert resources from planned Ukrainian counter-offensive in the Donetsk region, although the dam is far from the fighting. The Kakhovka Dam is crucial for drinking water, agriculture, and cooling the reactors of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that there was no immediate nuclear safety risk, but added that they were closely monitoring the situation. The dam security had been a concern throughout the war, with both sides accusing each other of plotting its destruction. Floods were already occurring downstream, with videos and images showing communities affected and streets filling with rising water. The destruction of the dam could also impact the water supply to Crimea, which is a point of geopolitical tension between Ukraine and Russia. So, Matt, what are your thoughts on this?
There's a lot of new information out about Ukraine right now. So there's this, there's what seems to be the beginning of the much awaited Ukrainian counteroffensive, as you said, in the Donetsk region. Just last night, a lot of fighting reported around Zaporizhzhia, that kind of area. And there's also new information out about the Nord Stream pipeline bombing that we've covered a bit. So we're going to go into this in more detail in the next episode, just because the situation is a little fluid, and probably by the time this episode comes out, there'll be more information. So we're just going to wait and get our ducks in a row on that. But just a few top line kind of thoughts. To your point at the beginning, it's a little kind of muddied and unclear exactly what happened. I mean, the Russians, of course, are saying the Ukrainians did it, and, you can take that as you will. It's the Russians saying it. At the same point, there's been two other theories. One is that the dam failed just because of Russia. So the dam, we know for sure that this dam crosses the Dnieper River, right? Which right along Kherson, that kind of area, in southern Ukraine, has been kind of like the line of control between Ukraine and the parts of Ukraine that Russia currently occupies, leading up to Crimea, right? So the Russians controlled that dam. It failed. And one theory has been going around since it happened is that it failed just because of Russian negligence, so like they didn't open up the proper amount of spillways, and water built up on the dam, and that caused it to fail. Like, I don't know that if that's what it is. And of course, the other one is that, the Russians deliberately blew it up and sabotaged it to kind of prevent an amphibious landing by the Ukrainians across the Dnieper River, and then push an offensive towards Crimea to the south. I would bet money that by the time this episode comes out, there'll probably be some strategic declassification of U.S. intelligence pointing to that the Russians were responsible, like sort of how we saw before the war broke out, a lot of the Biden administration pointing out intelligence of, the stuff that the Russians were planning to do. So if the Russians were responsible, I bet we'll see intelligence to that effect come out soon. And if so, I mean, yeah, it's a complete, I think it just does only kind of works to harden the European resolve to keep supporting the Ukrainians, and I think makes a formal war crime tribunal a lot more likely to happen in the future. I mean, to your point, it changes the ecology and the geography of southern Ukraine forever. I mean, I'm sure this dam will be rebuilt, not for a while. It'll be rebuilt at some point in the future, the reconstruction of the country. Also, you said the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, there's issues with the cooling rods there. Another point, which is sort of like if the Russians did do, is shooting themselves in the foot. So this dam fed a canal that supplied fresh water to Crimea. And this dam being destroyed will dry up that canal. So dries up fresh drinking water supplied to Crimea. So if it was the Russians, like, you kind of just shot yourselves in the foot. I don't know, unless we're sort of getting into a phase like near the end of World War II, like Operation Nero, where Hitler was like, yeah, just burn the whole country down as the Allies advanced through Germany. I don't know. There's a lot I want to say about this, with the Nord Stream bombing, with the drone attacks on the apartment buildings in Moscow a couple weeks ago, that we can, I guess, get into in the next show once we've had time to really see what's going on.
Yeah,
I don't know if you had more thoughts on that.
Well, I had a quick look at some local reporting. So I'm drawing on journalist John Sweeney, who's based out there, and he's also been a guest on the podcast, and also the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. So according to the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group, apparently Russian occupying forces have been overfilling the dam in many weeks prior to the breach. Now, obviously, if you overfill a dam, if there is a structural failure, yes, that could make that worse. However, there's been further reporting that those same forces have also been destroying other dams in other reservoirs, much smaller ones, and also constructing dams in other reservoirs to cause the water to overflow into flooding roads and fields. So that's according to the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. And then John Sweeney, he reported that local witnesses heard a single bang before the gushing of water. And he claims that this points to use of an explosive device, not artillery, because the Russians have been saying that the Ukrainians fired artillery at the dam. And to apparently fire artillery at a concrete sort of structure like a dam at a great distance requires multiple shots, not a single one. So that makes the use of artillery very unlikely. And apparently... So with the Ukrainians saying that, the Ukrainians in the area say that the Russians blew up the dam with a mine on the dry side, and that fits with the reported single bang. Many in Ukraine are apparently shocked at how this is being reported in the Western press as a dispute between Russia and Ukraine as to who's responsible, because in Ukraine they see it as very clear that Russia was responsible and Russian forces are the ones who benefit most from this action, not the Ukrainians, because obviously that flooding that area makes it very difficult for any Western supplied Ukrainian tanks to operate in that area, and also it diverts resources away from the military action that's taking place at the moment. So it's there. Yeah, I mean, Putin's got a lot riding on this war. We've said this on multiple episodes, and people I've spoken to have said it. I think we might be in that kind of scorched earth territory a little bit, because this is probably the most destructive thing Putin or the Russians could do without firing a nuclear weapon. And they know if they use a nuclear weapon, they will get consequences either from the US or potentially even China. Allegedly, China have warned them not to use any nuclear weapons. Yeah. So blowing up a dam or two does a shitload of damage, and it's not a nuke. And the thing is, it might lead to, and there is debate going on at the moment about war crimes. So there are some serious talks going on right now about war crimes tribunals, which is a good thing. But you won't probably see much else done, other than maybe supplying more weapons faster or helping the Ukrainians a little bit more. But I don't think this is the action that's going to lead to, NATO boots on the ground, B-52s rolling in, etc. And I think Putin knows that. I think Putin will do everything he possibly can that will not result in a nuclear confrontation or it boiling over. He's very clever. He knows how to sort of pick away at things. Also, then it picks away at NATO's credibility. And I've even read somewhere else that apparently some NATO members are considering taking actions in their own hands and joining the Ukrainians in the fight against Russia. And if that happens, that will be a bit of a game changer. So so I'm not it's a very dicey situation at the moment.
I don't like the idea of NATO members freelancing on their own. I mean, the alliance sort of famously runs on consent. I mean, that's kind of the whole purpose of NATO. That's how the organization is run. I think a nuclear bomb going off is kind of the only trigger that would push NATO into the conflict directly. I mean, I think we've said as much. Biden's national security advisor, I think, said a while ago that the response to a tactical nuke being used by the Russians is we would destroy their invasion force and the Russian Black Sea Fleet.
Yeah, indeed. So, so I think these sort of things are probably the most Putin can do without setting off a nuke. So I don't know for sure, but certainly based on this report of a single bang, and just knowing what's at stake for Putin, I would not put it past the Russians being responsible for this. That's all I can say. It could be it's all down to very bad timing and very poor maintenance. It could be that. It's unlikely to be Ukrainian shelling, because really, what does Ukraine benefit from this? Because Ukraine, why are they going to want to kill their own civilians? As John Sweeney put it, the Russian narrative makes no military or political sense. Ukraine is a democracy at war, and its generals are at pains to preserve civilian life in the occupied territories as best they can. So I don't think the Ukrainians are going to go up and blow up a huge dam. Yeah. One last point. The timing of this is just past the 80th anniversary of the British Dam Busters mission, which there's been an awful lot of documentaries about. So, if it is Putin, is he trying to kind of call us hypocrites because we blew up a dam against the Nazis during World War II? I don't know.
I mean, we'll know more about this in a couple of weeks and go into a lot more detail.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, Matt, that's everything for Espresso Martini today. So thank you for joining me on that. Everybody listening, we are going to continue on now on Extra Shots. Join us on Patreon for that. You can just go to patreon.com/secrets and spies, select your level of support, and you can either get a free cup or coasters, and then you can join us on Extra Shot. And on that, we were going to be looking at a boat full of spies that sank in Italy. We're going to be joined again by Dan to talk a little bit more about Kremlin critics who've been poisoned. And we're also going to have a quick look at whether or not Vladimir Putin's activities of when he worked for the KGB may have been exaggerated. So we'll catch you on there. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. This is Secrets and Spies.